Find out which 30 tech companies want to reform the way the government spies on us through the internet. Nate and Sam discuss the weekly gaming news and why Bitcoin is booming. All that and a whole lot more coming up on Tech News Today.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today, episode 1777, recorded Friday, May 26, 2017. Welcome to Tech News Today. This is the show where we tell you everything you need to know about technology. Today, I am Megan Maroney.
And I am Nathan Olivares-Giles.
It is good to have you. Jason's out for a day before the long weekend.
Yeah, he's taking a 4-day weekend.
Yeah.
Lucky guy.
Yes. I am also taking a 4-day weekend, so you'll be back on Tuesday.
Oh, yeah, that's right. But I'll be back here with Jason.
Yes,
all right?
You knew that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's on my calendar. Not a total surprise.
Well, since he's not here, I mean, feel free to report all the same news that we reported today on Tuesday. Because
he'll be camping.
Right.
Well, he's not there yet, but hopefully he'll disconnect. He'll be free from tech. He'll get some time away, and I'll have no idea what we talked about on Friday.
Yeah, I happen to know that his campground does have Wi-Fi, so I don't know.
What's the point?
Yeah, I know. That's what I say. But let's get to the news. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and another few dozen tech companies have sent a letter to Congress urging internet surveillance reform. The letter came from an umbrella organization called the Internet Association, which also includes Airbnb, Lyft, Uber, Dropbox, LinkedIn, and many others, as Congress begins to reform Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act of 2008. The company suggested specific reforms to the way the government collects information from non-U.S. persons who are not suspected of wrongdoing. So this law has been often creatively reinterpreted to allow for bulk information collecting and storing it for long periods of time. So this group just called for increased transparency and more oversight. And the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act will expire on December 31st unless Congress reauthorizes it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because this basically gives U.S. intelligence agencies kind of the ability to just suck up all of this like massive amount of data and communications from foreigners. But it also, I guess some of the concern is that it also incidentally or maybe mistakenly or kind of like, wink, wink, oh, what a mistake, collect some data that belongs to Americans as well. And that I guess it can be searched by analysts without a warrant. So kind of interesting. They're calling for the process to be a bit more transparent and a bit more specific. But this still doesn't cross a bridge that I continually get frustrated by not seeing, which is notifying the people involved that their data has been collected by some government agency and then that they might be involved in some sort of thing. Now, of course, you can't always tip people off because sometimes these investigations are secretive and they're actually looking after people that need to be looked into. But again, as you mentioned, this is just a mass data collection for people that aren't necessarily considered to have done anything wrong or being investigated for anything wrong. This is just out there. So pretty interesting stuff.
I mean, that's the thing, the notifying, like all of these companies ask, Microsoft, Google, they ask, the governments ask all these big companies for our information. And then many times they can't divulge that. They can only, they only recently have been able to say, like, this is how many government requests that we've gotten, but they can't say, they can't tell the people. And like you said, it's because often you don't want to tip people off, or sometimes you don't want to tip people off. I think that's such a rare occurrence. And, this is a lot of people's data being stored for a long time. And hopefully that this will have some effect, all these tech companies writing a letter. Who knows? Yeah,
we'll see. It's somewhat encouraging to see all of these companies that are frankly competing and would like to maybe, see the other ones like decline and fall and go away as they succeed. But they set that aside to unite in very specific instances such as this. One of the things that the Reuters article pointed out is that Section 702 is considered to be a vital tool by U.S. intelligence officials and estimated to be responsible for as much as a quarter of surveillance conducted by the U.S. national security agency. So it's a big deal. It's not just some light thing. But I'm glad you brought up, the one thing. The one thing that kind of drives me nuts is, if cops or any sort of authority is going to go into your home or look through your stuff in your home, physical things, they have to serve you a warrant. Like, they can't open that door without doing it, no matter who you are, right? And I'd like to see something on par, some sort of parity here. It doesn't quite exist, but we'll see where this goes. It's not quite the same as like a full lobbying group or an activist group, but they get together for very specific reasons. Well, if you've been ordering food from the delivery app Sprig, you won't anymore. Sprig is shutting down. Over a 4-year period, the San Francisco startup has raised $56 million and delivered millions of meals, they say. But that wasn't enough to find its way to profitability. With the shutdown now happening, the company's 200 employees will each get a 2-month severance package. And another one of Sprig's last acts will be job fairs to help its workers get new jobs. Sprig co-founder Gagan Biani said in a blog post announcing the shutdown, quote, "The demand for Sprig's convenient, high-quality food was always incredibly high, but the complexity of owning meal production through delivery at scale was a challenge," end quote. And with that, the company is now done. What do you think about this? They had some pretty high-quality stuff. They're fancy meals, and they weren't very cheap. And they're pushing people to deliver them within a window of 15 minutes, which is like that joke Domino's pizza delivery time thing that, it's like, does anyone actually ever get their stuff in 15 minutes? So it's pretty high standard here.
Yeah, and it seems like they didn't really understand how difficult it's basically the food service business, the restaurant business. Basically, they were in the restaurant business.
And that's a super low margin business, right?
Yeah.
Like almost nobody, most independent folks make money, like a ton of money from this.
Right. And I think Bento was another one that did this and that failed. It seems like there's this gap between, I want to be like an Uber Eats or a, Postmates, and they're taking food from a restaurant and delivering it. So that's a totally different thing. Actually having to decide how much food you're going to have and making it yourself is really different. And just because you know how to make an app or you know about data, you're an engineer or you're a tech entrepreneur, it doesn't mean that any of those skills are going to transfer into the difficulty of running a restaurant. It's
a really great point. And their menu, they would have hundreds of different items over this 4-year period, where a restaurant, maybe they'll have a couple dozen at most. Many have fewer than that, and they're just making that same thing all of the time, right? There were some interesting tweets amongst different tech journalists going back and forth, and I wish I could remember who tweeted this, but someone was comparing this to, like, why is it that pizza delivery folks can nail the delivery business, but tech companies can't? But again, like, it's a totally different type of business, a much more limited menu, a physical place with a small delivery geographic location versus scale. I think scale was kind of the concern here, and definitely something that the co-founders mentioned. I guess it's a bit sad to see an app that a lot of people really did like kind of go by the wayside, but the co-founders in their goodbye note said that they believe the future for this business is brighter than ever and that it's not going to go away. But given that it's such a low margin business, I wonder if maybe it's just better for us to leave our apartments and homes or whatever and just go get the food ourselves or call your local delivery person versus doing it through an app.
Yeah, I do think it's occasionally good to leave your house.
Yeah.
That's what I would say personally. But yeah, I don't get food delivered really very often. I have thought about it. I have a friend that's ill, and friends of ours were coming up with ideas to help her. And there's actually like a guy in Petaluma who does this, not making his own food, but he just he answered the phone when I called and talked to him. And he just goes to any restaurant. He charges $14, which is fine if you're ill. But if you're just too lazy to get up off the couch, $14 seems like a lot to me to get
that
food
could be
delivered.
an entire other meal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean, to me.
For you. Not my family of 5. I have not figured out how to feed them for $14 yet. But if anyone has any advice on that, Megan@twit.tv, please email me. Mark Zuckerberg gave the commencement speech at Harvard yesterday, and among the memes about the fact that he was wearing a suit, did not say he was running for president, and was flanked by men in top hats. There was also some real meat to the speech, especially around his mentioning of universal basic income. I don't know if you've heard me go on about this, Nate, but I am a big fan of exploring the future possibility of all of us doing what we love when the robots take over. So I get excited when anyone talks about this besides me. Zuck said, quote, "We should have a society that measures progress, not just by economic metrics like GDP, but by how many of us have a role we find meaningful." A lot of the internet is now abuzz with Zuckerberg talking about this trendy economic theory. In case you haven't heard of UBI, Universal Basic Income, it's the concept that a government pays every person in a country a set minimum income, regardless of their job. Proponents say people will work anyway because they will do something that they love, and non-believers say it will turn all of us into a bunch of lazy, corrupt slobs.
Well, some people really genuinely love being lazy. So I could see some people being like, well, maybe my job is to hang out on this couch and just like Netflix and, hang out and play video games or whatever, So if that's what you love, then yeah, maybe you will be. But, I think it's interesting that there's this question of like, will Zuckerberg run for president someday? It used to be a question of like, will Sheryl Sandberg run for someday? Who knows where this is all going to go? But he is getting into somewhat heady political concepts. And I love that people were asking if, like, why the Monopoly Man was hanging out in the background, which is really great. But
I guess that's a Harvard thing.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, but it is kind of a utopian idea. I actually like the idea in Star Trek where there's just no money, there's no currency, and people do what they love because we don't need money. We can just kind of share things. Now, how that economic policy would work out, I don't know, but I'd love to ask Mark what he thinks about that.
Yeah, no money, and then I would just like to wear those Star Trek clothes, like the short dress. So just only to have that to wear, to not think about anything else but that red long sleeve dress that Uhura wears. I mean, that would be better. I gotta have gotten off track.
Exactly. That could be a great future for us all. What do you think about? What do you think, to get us back on track a little bit? What do you think about the very simple idea that like he didn't graduate from Harvard? Yeah, he went. He's a dropout. Like, should Harvard and institutions bring back dropouts to speak to their graduates? Now, granted, he's probably like the most successful dropout from Harvard of all time, and obviously he knows a couple things about business, but.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting one because, I mean, life is different now. I mean, Leo didn't graduate from Yale either, and that's something that, he is very proud of because he has built this business. So it's, whether or not you really need to finish up at school, but who knows? I mean, I think obviously anyone would want Mark Zuckerberg speaking at their graduation.
Yeah, no matter like what grade or what institution it is.
Yes.
I'm paraphrasing here, but one of the things that he said that I really liked was that one of the best things he got from Harvard was meeting his wife. And that was just like adorable.
Right.
Like, you got to love that.
Yeah, that is sweet.
Yeah. Well, Apple is reportedly working on a chip dubbed the Apple Neural Engine, devoted specifically to AI tasks. And this was reported by Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, who's a scoop machine and generally very, very accurate. Such chips could handle facial and speech recognition on phones, and maybe someday decisions made by self-driving cars or augmented reality gadgets that can recognize objects in their environment to overlay, computer graphics in the real world and things like that. Qualcomm, Google, and NVIDIA have already developed similar processors that already exist out there in the world and are open to the public, and those are dedicated to AI tasks. But Bloomberg says it's unclear if this chip will be ready for any Apple products this year. Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference kicks off Monday, June 5th, and Apple is expected to talk about some of its AI plans, as Google and Facebook have done at their respective developer conferences earlier this year. When I was reading this report, it sounded pretty interesting, but it also kind of sounded like a no-brainer, like obviously Apple's working on this. They already have, a motion processor that's dedicated just to interpreting like where your phone's at, what it's doing, how it's moving. A lot of health apps use that. And of course, the whole chipset is kind of taking a lot of weight into doing everything. So this could actually help with battery life. But this kind of seems like, Apple should be doing this, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was what I'm with you exactly. Like, it's like, well, of course, we never know what Apple's really working on, so it's always fun to guess at it. But the idea that right now they use the main processor and the graphics chip to do the AI, and they would be able to offload that and then have the faster battery, which is the selling point, of course. And this is like the same thing as Google's TPUs, right, that we talked about last week?
Yeah, pretty similar, except that this would be like on a device versus on a Google, server center, and that you connect to remotely, and then Google's holding all the data. This would be localized and on your specific device, which is slightly different, but very similar in the sense that it's machine learning.
But it's what Apple's always been proud of. It stays on the device.
Exactly.
So it's not this giant warehouse with all the pictures of your face and your children's faces.
A radically
and that
different
relationship
privacy consideration.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, it's unclear if it'll be ready this year. They didn't necessarily say, they just said it would be, he said that Gurman sources said it would be on a device, right? Could be an iPad, could be an iPhone, could be Amazon Echo-like device.
Yeah.
Could be a car.
Yeah, and when there have been rumors of this so-called Siri speaker for quite a long time now, whether or not we'll see such a thing at WWDC would make sense. But Amazon is really kind of leapt to the front of maybe the public consciousness of what voice-driven AI looks like because of the Echo speaker line. And of course, Google has made a lot of headway with its basically AI first approach to its entire company. So it'll be really interesting to see how different a vision, Apple's vision of this could be, considering that unlike Amazon, which makes money from selling you, other people's things because it's essentially a storefront, or unlike Google, which makes most of its revenue from advertising, Apple makes its money from selling you its devices. So what that kind of device-centric a vision for AI and software could look like could be fascinating. So I'm hoping we hear more about this soon. But either way, a pretty interesting, but also kind of a no-brainer scoop from Gurman.
Yeah, but I mean, the Siri has been around for a long time.
Yeah, it really was the first kind of popular voice AI on a phone.
Right, and so in some ways, Apple was ahead in artificial intelligence, and now they've fallen behind. And I mean, people don't really like Siri. She has a very bad reputation. I mean, even people who aren't really involved in technology. I was getting my hair cut today, and we were having a discussion about chicory, which we didn't know what it was. It was like something about chicory being in coffee, which apparently it is. And we all didn't know what chicory was. So instead of someone said, ask Siri, and someone else said, oh, no. Siri doesn't know anything. So I pulled up Google Assistant on my phone and impressed everyone in the hair salon, which is really the only reason I get my hair cut, so that I can impress everyone. And, asked the Google Assistant what chicory was, and she answered me in a pleasant voice, told me there was a picture and everything. And so, it's just better. So if they do come out with some sort of device, I doubt they'll call it like a Siri speaker because nobody likes Siri.
Oh, I personally don't like any of them right now. None of them are as smart as I'd like.
Do you use Google Assistant on your iPhone?
I don't. I've tried it and not really into it.
Do you know what chicory is?
I don't.
It's in the licorice family.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Oh, no, the dandelion family.
Okay.
I don't know.
Man, now I feel bad for not knowing what chicory is.
I learned today and I already forgot, so don't worry.
Of all the voice-controlled assistants, though, Siri is the one that I use the most. But that's because I always have my iPhone in my pocket,
Bitcoin is getting bigger, especially in South Korea and the rest of Asia. But as the price of Bitcoin rises, some of the exchanges can't handle the traffic. Bitcoin reached a record high on Thursday with a 500-fold increase over the past 5 years. But TechCrunch reports that Coinbase, the cryptocurrency exchange that's received over $117 million in funding from investors, cannot handle all the traffic. Coinbase has intermittently crashed. It's gone offline. It's experiencing other technical difficulties. According to reports, it's back online now. The app and the website are functioning normally. But I guess the soaring growth is due to the popularity in Asia. Reports came out saying, oh, well, it's grown so fast because everyone's paying their Bitcoin ransom, but that's not true. That's not accurate. No one is actually, people can't figure out how to, the people who got phished and had to pay ransomware also can't figure out how to
I'd like
use
to,
Bitcoin.
but this thing isn't working. I don't know what to tell you.
So yeah, it's, I would like to see an alternative currency work, but when you hear things like this, that it can't stay up, and it makes you a little scared.
Yeah, there are a ton of technical limitations, obviously, to all these things. I mean, even the slowness of chip readers at the grocery store drives me nuts. So it's like even businesses that's all they do is take and shuffle around your money can't get some of these things right. So it would be nice to see an independent outside of the financial kind of institution thing take off. But I also just kind of am amazed by the fact that Bitcoin a few years ago, it really had its highs. People were touting it and investing in it. And I felt like it kind of kind of died out a bit. It was kind of a dud, and it's having like this resurgence in prominence that I find fascinating, but the technology just can't keep up enough. I wonder if that will get enough resources and people back interested in it to solve some of these problems, or if there are just fundamental flaws. I really don't know enough about how the technology works to say, but you know, all I can think is with this renewed interest, maybe enough smart people will attack the problem and it'll improve.
Maybe.
Yeah, not
Did
really
you
sure.
invent Bitcoin? I always ask everyone that I work
Did
with.
I did not invent Bitcoin, but thanks for asking.
Okay.
I appreciate you giving me the benefit of the doubt, even though I just said I didn't really know how the technology
Well, I
works.
mean,
Like,
that's
well,
what-
actually, I was lying because I invented it.
Well,
I made this.
that's what you would say if you wanted to keep your
right,
identity.
exactly. But as a reporter, I actually have a few dollars in a Bitcoin app from a few years ago, just because we had to like test something out back when I was working at Wired, and I don't remember what Bitcoin wallet app I used, and I have no idea. It's probably like $20, and maybe now it's worth like 35 or something. But I wish I could at least have something. It's like I need one of those little digital trackers, but just for my own Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have had that problem. Leo, I think he forgot his password.
Oh,
I
really?
think, or something like that. But
Gosh.
yeah, my husband, when like 6 or 7 years ago, when it was first a thing, he had his class mine a Bitcoin. He said, if anyone could mine a full Bitcoin, you'll get an A. And one student did, and he already had an A, so it wasn't. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
and
Of course, it was that kid.
yeah, so a quick reminder that you can comment on anything that we discuss by emailing us at tnt@twit.tv. We accept praise, we accept criticism, we accept corrections, we accept it all. And don't forget to subscribe to the show, twit.tv/TNT.
Well, Sam Maskovich from Ars Technica is back with us here to chat about gaming, tech, pop culture, all those good things. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Hello. How's everyone doing?
Even better now that you're here. I actually coming on Fridays, filling in on Fridays is one of my favorite things to do because we get to talk to you. So I want to start with Far Cry 5. It looks intense and very timely and kind of also terrifying at the same time. Basically, it's an open world game that will deal with religious fanaticism in Montana, which I can't help but think of the guy just elected to Congress who body slammed a reporter from Montana the other day. But nonetheless, this is a video game and not a real thing, but it looks like it could be a real thing and hitting on some interesting topics. Tell us all about this.
Sure. Yeah, I was invited to a pre-E3 event in Los Angeles last week, and that is when a producer for Ubisoft Montreal came in and kind of scared the crap out of everybody in the room. Dan Hay works for Ubisoft Montreal. He's creative director, executive producer there. Deep voice, big, imposing guy. And he starts telling some really intense stories about his vision of America, how that was affected long ago, and how he'd always wanted to make one of the Far Cry games, which normally go to very exotic international locations, and make it inside the United States. He was trying to figure out how to do that, and he started thinking about this idea of tension and pressure within the United States. And he said the subprime mortgage crisis and the Oregon militia takeover from early last year were sort of these two things that hand in hand made him say, America's kind of messed up. So he pushed through a plan to create an entire cult inside of rural Montana, a full compound with leaders, an actual cult expert Ubisoft hired to help figure out how cults work and create a convincing cult compound. By the way, that's a job that I totally want to be
the cult
advisor.
expert.
Yeah, cult advisor for video games. Why not?
Yeah.
So what we end up with, first off, we have not played the game. We simply have pretty much what you guys showed in the video version. We also saw a little bit of a first-person gameplay style thing. We actually saw the game seem to be played. And so Far Cry games kind of stick you in a random crazy world with a gun and a prayer. And you have to survive, you have to hunt, you have to find vehicles, find allies. And that appears to be happening just in Montana. So you're going to be going through cities, going through the woods, getting into planes, getting onto little like four-wheelers, dune buggy style vehicles. There's an 18-wheeler. I'm not sure if you drive it or just hang out and get supplies from it. There will be hunting and fishing. I'm not sure if fishing had been in other Far Cry games, but and there will be other. Dan would not reveal a lot of stuff. I kept trying to ask about different systems and things and how allies would work. But, very grandiose sales pitch, including some really messed up stories that he and everyone at Ubisoft swore me to not repeat. There's a group of 20 press, and he said, we're never going to tell these specific stories. Do not repeat them. Which I find interesting because I can't fact check some of the stuff they said. It's very crazy, but it sounds like there's some weird stuff happening behind the scenes to get this game made is pretty much all I can say.
Wow, Sam, I wish you wouldn't have said that because now I just want to know what you know that we'll never know. You're killing me here. You're killing me here. But Far Cry 3, you're like, you're vacationing and they went wrong and you're abducted by pirates. Far Cry 4, you're dealing with like a Himalayan civil war. In this game, you're in Montana, like we said, dealing with religious fanatics. And as you mentioned, you have to find allies and get through things. Did they mention whether or not like you'd be able to choose which side you're on? Like, could people choose to be on the side of the zealots or of the, I don't want to say normals, but, the people who aren't maybe into this cult? Like, what are the kind of different choices people can make? Or have they not said yet?
We had zero information about how you will eventually complete the story. Everything was set up to be about taking on the cult, although some specific information about how the game starts was revealed, and we're not allowed to say that until the game comes out. But
so many teasers.
We were told about these allies. There's 3 little videos, and we have Jerome the pastor, who's a dude who's got a Bible in one hand and a shotgun in the other, and he is not a fan of the cult, which has this father, son, very biblical overtone sort of stuff going on. And there's 2 others. There's a former pilot and mechanic who helps you like rig up airplanes and put guns on them. And there's a woman who runs a bar whose father used to run the bar, and he went through some stuff as a result of the cult, so she wants revenge. So it sounds like your job is going to be, to some extent, to find other people who have been affected by this cult and ally with them and take them down. However, I imagine the shades of gray are going to be intense because Dan did seem to empathize to some extent with this sense of anti-American, anti-government sensation. The sense of who's got their hands on the wheel in the American government is the question that he thinks a lot of people are asking. That seemed to be a lot more of his sentiment than it was about, for example, anti-Obama sentiment. And I do think this is going to be really interesting once the game comes out, which won't be until February of next year. So that is some time. But when it comes out, we're going to have a lot of questions as to what does and does not get covered and how it gets covered in terms of the myriad things that anti-American sentiment inside of America consists of. Is this going to talk about race? Is it going to talk about class? What kind of topics are we going to get into in a game that, for all intents and purposes, is throwing you out with guns and running around going yeehaw? Like, how is that really going to work if it's a game that's supposed to be fun? It's a question nobody had a real answer for that yet, and there's a lot of time to answer it.
Is there skiing in it? Because that's what I like to do in Montana.
Good question.
I did not see any snow in any of the footage, but I am certainly not the keeper of their skiing, snowboarding, snow machining, and DLC add-on packs, expansion packs. They could certainly have, the snowy Montana secret second cult to take down or something. I don't know.
Well, switching gears a little bit, the reviews for Rime are in, and they're mostly good. Rime is a game that's out for the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch, and many critics say the game is beautiful and fun, but a little bit too much like Zelda, The Last Guardian, Shadows of the Colossus, a lot of really great beloved games. Sam, have you given this game a shot? What do you think of all the reviews that we've seen so far?
So I'm careful to read other reviews because I'm still working on mine. Also, just a correction, it is not out on the Switch yet. It'll come later this year, quote unquote. It is out on Steam on Windows, and that's how I've been playing it. And I don't really care what other people are saying in terms of negativity. This game has been in production forever. I want to say since
Like 5
2011
years,
or
right?
2012.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was supposed to come out back in 2013 on the older Xbox 360. It was a deal that this company called Tequila Works had signed, and Tequila Works has put out like nothing. They had a game called Deadlight that was very boring. It was about Seattle, and it was made by Spaniards, and I, as Seattleite, hated that fact. But that they totally switched gears with this game. The footage, anyone watching the video footage can see this very colorful open world island sort of environment in which you're this little boy with like a red scarf running around solving puzzles with story that's unfolding with no words. It's all visual. So this ends up following in the footsteps of some games you mentioned. So there's a little bit of a Zelda shadow, but certainly Shadow of the Colossus, Ico, The Last Guardian, these sorts of those three games are all made by the same team over at Sony, their Japanese studio. And they are landmarks in terms of games as art, games that unfold in this very cinematic way, but it's interactive, which means the story unfolds. It's not just sitting there throwing text at you. You're not just looking for little email documents hidden in a cupboard like in BioShock or things like that. This is about evoking a feeling through visual stuff proceeding as you interact. So all that is to say, Rime is one of the more delightful entries in that genre of interactive narrative game where you push the narrative forward by solving puzzles, running around, and interacting in very subtle, simple ways. This is not an incredibly complex game. The biggest knock I would have against it is that it is not this riveting puzzle game where it's really difficult. It's, in fact, kind of hand-holdy. But I would say this is right there at maybe not the best Studio Ghibli or Steven Spielberg film, but imagine those two coming together to make something that was like close to their best. Like if you love that genre, you'll like this genre. It definitely feels when I play it. I'm always snapping screenshots. It's one of the more beautiful games I've played in some time, just in terms of the way color and giant structures and random little creatures come popping out. I keep snapping the snapshot screenshot button as I play it because it just is this kaleidoscope of beauty and color. Really, it feels like opening up an old clamshell Disney VHS case. That's what I feel like when I'm playing Rime. So if that sounds like a thing you want to do where it is meaningfully interactive in terms of selling a story, but is not throwing a bunch of text at you and is not super difficult, I think that's a niche. And not everyone's going to love it. I'll love it. I really like Rime.
Just so you know, I'm not the only one that asks these questions, but Loquacious in our chat room would like to know if she can play a little girl or do you have to only play a little boy?
There is, as far as I know, you start out as this little boy. And I'm not sure, I don't want to spoil necessarily whether that ties into anything, but there are details about a family and about perhaps the boy is someone else. So it's not it's not like Minecraft where you're just able to project yourself or playing a boy or a girl is equal. There may very well be something about the fact that you're a boy, but I'm not going to answer that for this broadcast. I do like when games afford a plot that has room for you to be a male or a female or to be a lot of other options. This is not one of those games.
So when can we expect your review?
Coming up this weekend. I have a lot of video gaming to do while the sun is out in Seattle, so that'll be up this weekend at Ars Technica.
Awesome. Fantastic. I got to say, there's not a lot of games out there where you get to play as a person of color, as the central hero, the main person. So to see a little brown boy running around on the screen, being a brown boy myself, like that's pretty exciting and kind of rare. I'm super excited to play that. But another big game that a lot of folks are way more people probably are looking forward to this than Rime, is Destiny 2. And over the last few days, we've learned a ton about Destiny 2. And I want to ask you, Bungie, they're talking about, this whole plan for hybrid servers, and we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about the gameplay we've seen so far. It sounds like on PCs, we're going to get 4K, 60 frames per second. That sounds pretty great. Let's talk about Destiny 2. It looks pretty great. I mean, is it going to be great?
So I was invited while I was in this Los Angeles pre-E3 event. I was invited to the big Destiny 2 gameplay reveal last week, and I know there are a lot of stories that have come out of that. What hasn't come out is that PC gameplay. You'll be able to play the game on a bunch of different systems. So Xbox One, PlayStation 4, the souped-up versions of both of those being Project Scorpio and PlayStation 4 Pro, respectively, if that's not confusing, and then also Windows computers. And I was very excited to get mouse and keyboard and sit down with the PC version, and they had quite a system. 1080 Ti graphics card, which retails for about $700. That is top of the line in terms of consumer grade for video cards right now, and all the other bells and whistles in the computer. And I was blazing away, 4K resolution, 60 frames a second. And those numbers matter because when you're playing on console, you don't get 60 frames a second. That's only 30 frames a second that refresh. And the reason that's meaningful is because Bungie's roots as the makers of Halo were always in these 60 frame a second experiences. That's how the best Halo games have played, where you've had this very crisp, high-speed refresh that feels... that stuff really matters in this beat-to-beat shooty shoot when you're just aiming guns around and shooting around. And Destiny 2, just by default, feels better with that doubled super high frame rate, but it's not going to come to console, that frame rate. And the PC version is going to be delayed. There's no sense of exactly when it's coming out, but it almost certainly will not be out September 8th, which is when the Xbox and PlayStation versions will be out. But I loved getting to sit and play it on the computer. And I also really had a good first blush with it. And that's how I felt about the first Destiny. Destiny has always been good at just putting you in a situation, having interesting enemies, interesting missions. The problem is the first one makes you repeat a lot of stuff over and over and over. It's not very compelling to keep on coming back to. It's essentially a short loop that you're expected to repeat a lot. I got tired of that game after about 7-8 hours. I kept trying to go back. I kept getting bored. And Destiny 2 may be built to be fresh and interesting 8 hours, 16 hours, 24 hours, 100 hours, and on. But that's something that we're going to have to wait a lot longer. I think that's going to be weeks after the game comes out in September for us to have a true answer as to whether it's going to be a game that lasts. But it felt really good. It felt like there was more stuff to do in that beat to beat. Not a ton, though. It feels incredibly familiar, and there are a lot of people on the internet who think it's a little underwhelming. I think they expected a lot more.
Did they talk at all about narrative or story? You know, for me, like you, it was fun. And at first it was like, okay, this could be something I could get into. And then over time, because of the repetition, because of the loop, it wasn't as exciting and kind of lost my interest. Did they talk at all about whether there would be maybe a better narrative or story there for Destiny 2? Because that was a criticism that a lot of people, myself included, had of the original.
I mean, we got to see the setup that everything has been wiped. You start Destiny 2 as this souped up killer, and well, not killer, but a hero guardian. And then there's this great evil that takes over your town, or the Citadel, pardon me, and you're back to zero. You have been killed in a way that you come back super weak, and you're building up from that. And it looks like they're showing these little cinema scenes where you're seeing more people who don't have helmets on. Mm-hmm. There may be towns that are full of real people and characters that are developed that you interact with in a meaningful way. Because that certainly wasn't the case in Destiny 1. Destiny 1 was essentially rushed out with most of its original story thrown into the trash. There was a real weird upheaval that happened. A little bit's been put on the record about that, but nobody's exactly sure what the heck was going on with Bungie as they were trying to get that game out the door. So I'd like for it to be good, but again, we had a very limited amount of time to really play what was on offer. And also, Destiny is about emergent stories in which you group up with some people and you kind of have a chat room experience. So having this really drawn out specific story is more of a single player experience. And I don't know that Bungie's ever going to go back to that in the way that they did with the original Halo games, which they were kind of cheesy and cliched, but they did do their best to develop this sort of core set of characters who interacted with each other, and that really carried you through the campaign. I don't know that Destiny will ever be built for that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I think of Overwatch, which is a game that really isn't built around like a central narrative, but it's been so embraced by people online doing just that, what Destiny is kind of built around, which is like getting together with your friends and doing missions and kind of creating your own narrative, that people have found their own stories. Of course, I'm sure that Bungie wouldn't say, hey, we want to like copy some Overwatch stuff. But, you know, my hope is that kind of maybe something like that could happen where there's a merging of the narrative and this kind of group play idea and concept.
Well, they did talk about guilds, the idea that you can get this group together, you'll have concurrent progress, a little bit more nimbly and actually baked into the game than last time. And then there's this also sort of thing where you can be a lone wolf who fills in the missing cracks. So there's a guild who needs, one more person for a 6-person mission. They grab a lone wolf, and the lone wolf doesn't have to stay with the clan, and they could potentially join up or whatever. But that to me was a whole lot of talk and no action. I don't know what the heck they're going to do to connect players together, but they definitely don't like people playing by themselves. And I know at Ars Technica, a lot of our readers want these sort of adventure games where you're building experience, getting loot, getting further and further. They want to play by themselves. They want to chill out. They don't want to have other people. They don't want voices in their headset. They're, that old guard that likes how Bungie makes shooting games and makes them big and occasionally has other people come in. They don't want that commitment to a clan, as it were. So I am super curious whether Bungie's insistence that you have to play with other humans is going to really pay off in a way that everyone loves. So we'll have to see, because they have to build a fun sandbox. I think Overwatch just happens to be a good game. Nobody had it built specifically with chat or social things in mind. It's just, people like it and they're finding ways to share it. They're getting on Twitch and so on. Bungie should probably just be careful to make it a fun game that people then clob onto, as opposed to, we're building all the things to make it very social and streamable. Like, just make a good game first, then we'll meet you there halfway. That's my feeling.
Awesome. Well, your perspective is always appreciated. Thank you so much for joining us, Sam. Sam's a culture editor at Ars Technica and is on Twitter at SamRed. And I guess you can find all of your coverage on arstechnica.com. Anything else you want to say before we throw you out of here, Sam?
Well, once I'm done reviewing Rime, I will be playing a special super early copy of ARMS. If you're in Seattle and you want to try out the new Nintendo Switch fighting game, which I'm otherwise not allowed to talk about, holler at me. Maybe we could arms up here in Seattle.
Oh, fascinating stuff. I might have gotten an early copy of that too. I may or may not be trying to play online with you, but also this weekend for Switch owners, you can download a test version of ARMS, and there are specific times and days you can play basically over this weekend and next week. So if you own a Switch, something to look out for. Everyone can take part in that as well.
Yeah. If you happen to be lucky enough to have found a Switch at Best Buy or at a scalper or inside like a dude's trench coat, yes, the ARMS. I want to say test fire ARMS. I can't remember the exact phrase, but
I think it's called ARMS Test Fire. Yeah, Global Test Fire.
Google. There's a lot of different time slots. They're like an hour a pop. Get on that eShop if you haven't already. If you're, if you need to get away from your family this Memorial Day weekend for any reason, Nintendo will have your back. Definitely test it out.
Awesome. All right, Sam. Thank you so much, and I guess we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, have a great holiday weekend, y'all.
Is ARMS a military game or no?
No, so ARMS is like a fighting game, but unlike maybe Street Fighter where it's kind of on a 2D plane and we're like fighting side by side, this is basically kind of over the shoulder behind the back. So you're essentially seeing your character move directly in front of you, and you can play traditional style with a controller, or you can detach your Joy-Cons and wave your arms around and flail them as you'd like. So it gives you some options if you want to, look like a fool, which I'll be doing a lot of, or if you want to play old school on your couch in a more relaxed way. So here's some footage of the game. It's a pretty colorful and really great looking game. And oddly enough, this game isn't out. We don't know the backstory for the characters. We don't even know if people like it or not yet, but the characters are so colorful and interesting looking that a lot of people online are already creating fan fiction and doing their own little illustrations. There seems to be a small but very passionate fan base so far. So all the early signs look like Nintendo might have a hit on its hands. But this is a game they made themselves, and we'll see where it goes. The hype is building, so hopefully the game lives up to that hype.
It looks like it would be some good exercise too.
It could be, yeah. You know, I think a lot of people really did enjoy Wii boxing and, you know, Wii tennis and stuff like this. And at least this gives you the option of playing it that style or a more traditional style where you don't have to flail around, or maybe going back and forth. So
you should set a workout on your Apple Watch and see what kind of workout you get when you're playing, because I would like to know.
Maybe I'll bring that into the review process.
Yeah, for sure. We got some feedback. Charles writes in response to the news on Google tracking offline credit and debit purchases. You have to realize Google, Apple, and Samsung already have relationships with the banks for things like Android Pay and Apple Pay, so it's probably not much of a jump for them having the data of what we purchase when using this technology to getting that info from the banks outside of using Tap to Pay. And I meant to do some research on this because I hadn't thought about Apple Pay because, yeah, I use Apple Pay all sorts of places. And I didn't really think about Apple using that information, but they probably are.
Yeah, you know, that's interesting. And I don't think we have a clear answer as to how Apple or Samsung or any of these companies are using that sort of information. When you make a payment in a physical location, just as you would with your credit card or anything else, the information that's stored is what you bought, how much you spent on it, what time and where, right? Pretty basic stuff. The big leap for me in all this with Google is not only that they're tracking your purchases, which makes sense if you're using Android Pay. You'd want that because, hey, you know what? I wasn't actually in, you know, Florida and my credit card was just used over there. I'd want my bank to let me know, right? Location helps that. But it's the other things where they're kind of using that in concert with how you're using Google Maps and how you're using these other apps to basically track your location all of the time in a kind of omnipresent way. For me, that's what makes it more creepy. And that's not necessarily something that Apple does or even Samsung as far as we know. And of course, there are the different considerations for the level of information that Google and others like Facebook and stuff like that collect on you, just tracking kind of everything without abandon. So I think there's still a creepiness factor here that I'd like to see Google come out and maybe explain and address a little bit more head on. But Charles has some fair points. Well, TNT's fans of the day are Tilly and JJ, who write, quote, "From your show, JJ and I have been learning all about tech, the world, and everything. By the time we get big enough to fly, we hope to learn how to use Google Assistant to find the best continuous Wi-Fi route going south. We usually listen to the audio podcast because it's more our size, but wanted a big screen when we heard about free bananas," end quote. And these are some of the most adorable fan of the day pictures I've ever seen.
They didn't write this. They tweeted it.
They tweeted it. Oh, okay. Thank you for the distinction. Very important that we get that there. But I got to say, you know, as cute as photos are, it looks like they're not necessarily looking at the screen.
That's true.
But it's either way, if
they're listening.
Yeah, if you're listening to the audio podcast or you're watching on the screen, it's all appreciated, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Really adorable photos. Thank you again for tweeting those out to us. Show us how you watch or listen to TNT. Just record a video or take a picture of yourself or set it up or a picture of your setup and post it on Instagram, Google+, Twitter, Facebook, and use the hashtag HowIWatchTNT, and we'll find it.
A high-end Swiss watchmaker called H. Moser has created a new line of mechanical watches that look just like the Apple Watch, the Swiss Alp Watch Zzz. And the Swiss Alp Watch Brr will run about $26,900. The company's only making 20 of these. So if you want a dumb watch that looks like a stylish smartwatch, you can find them at their website. That's hmoser, moser.com. I guess they've been making these for a while, but these new ones look just like the Apple Watch, except they're a mechanical watch. No phone, no messaging, no sketches or heartbeats to send. The Swiss Alps Watch on the Rocks has 232 baguette cut sapphires and baguette cut diamonds on it also.
Wow.
And if you're watching the video, you see that instead of the heart rate sensor on the back, it's just clear, it's open, so you can see the beautiful gears that will not deliver you your text messages.
This just kind of like, I really don't get it. And I guess maybe that $26,000 watch just isn't for me if I don't get it, aside from the price. But I think the Apple Watch looks pretty good. You know, I got one on my wrist. I like the way it looks. But why would you spend that much money for something that looks just like the Apple Watch but doesn't, it doesn't do there's some kind of disconnect here for me. It's just something I'm not quite getting.
Well, I think people do spend that much money on high-end watches.
Yeah, and it seems like if you would want something that would at a glance communicate to people, hey, this is way different than that $300 watch you have on your wrist.
Right.
This is something different and this is something special. Rather than we went to the hobby shop and we bedazzled our Apple Watches this weekend.
It does look like a bedazzled Apple Watch.
What are you communicating to? And I guess if you want that feeling of like, hey, I spent 26 grand on this and nobody knows about it. Well, okay, but I don't really think I need that for myself.
Yeah.
I sound like a hater right now. I know I'm hating a lot on the people who are buying these 20 watches. What am I missing, Megan? What am I missing?
No, I've never understood fancy watches that cost $20,000. But I know people. Yeah. I'm trying to think of the horologists. I know. Very interested in that. I am not one.
Well, listen, if you got like a watch that's 100 years old, or even a few decades old, or hey, you're saying, hey, this is the watch that Paul Newman wore when he was racing in the 24 Hours of Le Mans in France, and it's just like it, or it is the exact one. I could understand if I have gobs of money and I can spend 20 grand on a watch. Interesting. There's like a historical context. There's like a legacy I'm tying into. Okay, I get it. Like, I'm nerdy about lots of things. I would spend $500,000 on a car if I could, or whatever, right? And that doesn't necessarily make sense to a lot of people. But this looks just like an Apple Watch, which is like literally, I think I spent like $400 on mine. That's the part to me. Okay, I'll let it go.
Well, I mean, if you imagine that it might still be working in, 50 years or 100 years.
That's a good point. This probably won't.
Right. So that your if you bought that right now, then your great-grandchildren could say like, oh, my great-grandfather Nate, he bought this around the time when the Apple Watch first came out, and they would absolutely talk like that. I don't know why.
I wonder how much they would charge, because that's how we'll sound in the future. I wonder how much they would charge to like convert my smart Apple Watch into a dumb watch using their old school tech.
That's a good question. Like, just dig out. I don't think they would ever do that. They are too fancy.
They're like, no, we need to make the outsides that look the same ourselves. Well, what a fascinating story. What a fascinating story. Well, TNT records live every Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, 2300 UTC at twit.tv/live. And you can be a part of the show by emailing us at tnt@twit.tv or leaving us a short voicemail at 260-TNT-SHOW. You can also hit us up on Twitter at Tech News Today TV.
And you can share your thoughts on the stories that we discuss in the TNT subreddit at technewstoday.reddit.com and subscribe to the show. Please. See, I said please. Go to twit.tv/TNT. And if you want to tweet at me about your bedazzled Apple Watch, I'm at Megan Maroney.
And I'm at Nate OG. Thanks to our technical director, Anthony, Mario for helping out in the studio, Kim for editing the show, and thanks to you for talking tech with us today. We'll see you on Tuesday. Monday's a holiday. Enjoy that 3-day weekend, right?